Welcome to part 8 of Let's Play The Legend of Zelda. This part is gonna be about 80% dungeon and 20% overworld, since we're pretty close to the next dungeon anyway. And the dungeon is actually gonna be pretty long. And honestly, we're not gonna get a whole lot done in that time. It's just that the dungeon is pretty large without a lot of things to get in the dungeon. But again, it makes sense, because we're getting pretty close to the end of the game, at least if you're doing all the dungeons in order. And the game has a pretty good difficulty curve, at least when it comes to the dungeon. The overworld doesn't really have a difficulty curve, because you can go pretty much anywhere. Also, remember last part when I got the magical rod? I do, and it's still awesome. But pay attention now, because this is gonna be important. We are now entering the Lost Woods. This specific square is very similar to the Lost Hills where we went through in part 5, in that it loops, and if you don't take a specific path, you'll be stuck. Well, not exactly. There are two ways out of here. One is to the right, and you can always go to the right without having to go a specific path, but, well, you can only go to the right, so it doesn't really get you anywhere. And the only other way out is to go up, left, down, and then left again, and that will bring you to the graveyard, which we just came from, so in this case that's not gonna be important, but it's mostly for when you wanna go to the graveyard from this side. Now, I'm gonna be wandering around here for a few seconds, because there's something I'm failing to understand here, and that is that even after going the right path, you can never go up or down from this square, because then you'll just loop again. You can only go right in any occasion, or left if you do the specific path. But the way I thought it worked at first is that if you go up, left, down, and from there you can just go in any direction, but it turns out I was wrong, so now I'm just taking the right out of here. It's not really a big deal though, since the square below and the square above it you can take other paths to get there, so that really isn't a big deal. The ironic thing is that in one of the spaces below the Lost Woods is the old woman who will give you a hint about the Lost Woods, but only if you pay her enough, but also don't pay her too much. I'm not gonna show it off, but the only thing she says is go northwest, southwest to the Forest of Maze, which is not all that clear. I mean, what is the Forest of Maze? And again, that's only after you pay her, and that is only after you pay her not too much, but not too little. So the moral of the story is that the people of Hyrule can go fuck themselves, because the old man is a dick, the old woman is a bitch, and that's pretty much all the people of Hyrule we see in this game. The only other people we meet are the moblins, who are actually nicer to you, so what the hell, let Ganon win. Ganon takes over, he kills all the old men and women, the only people left are the moblins who will just give me money, the end. Zelda 2 never has to happen, so that's a plus. We can still stop Ganon in the other two timelines, so what the hell, 2 out of 3. Can't win them all, right? In fact, I'm pretty sure this is the timeline in which Ganon has already taken over. Also, not to get too off topic, but I hate the Zelda timeline, the official, quote-unquote, Zelda timeline. That doesn't make any sense, because apparently this game, the first game, came after like 12 other games. Sure guys, that was all part of the plan. It was all supposed to happen that way, part of the bigger picture from the very beginning. And I was totally not trying to tie together games that have absolutely nothing to do with each other. Makes sense to me. Also, welcome to Dungeon 7, the Demon Dungeon. And to get here you have to use the recorder in front of the lake, which will drain the lake and then reveal a staircase into this dungeon. And as you can see from the video time, we're gonna be here for a while, let's say 15 minutes. The dungeon is large, lots of rooms, and most of those rooms are just absolutely filled with enemies, which for some reason I go out of my way to fight all of them, even though like right now I don't need to, but oh, I get bombs for them. Bombs I didn't need, but okay. Also, me fighting enemies I don't need to fight isn't necessarily the main reason that this part is so long. It's also that a lot of rooms in this dungeon have locked doors that will only open once you defeat all the enemies, so I kinda have to. On top of that, it's also just filled with bosses and mini-bosses from earlier dungeons, and I actually made a list. It has 6 Moldorms, 3 Dick Doggers, 6 Dodongos, 1 Grumble guy, I'll get to that later, and Wall Masters near the end of the dungeon. And at the very end of the dungeon, the boss you fight is the lame-ass dragon from the first dungeon. I think the design mentality behind this dungeon is just quantity over quality. Like, they throw all the really easy enemies at you, but they also throw like a fuck ton of them at you. There are no dark nuts in this dungeon, or any Wizros or likes. It's all just the boomerang throwing moblins with the occasional Stalfos or snake, which is called a rope. Again, this dungeon isn't very dangerous, it's just very long, and honestly it's kinda easy, mostly because, yes, there are a lot of enemies, but that doesn't mean they'll hit you. If you can do one room full of moblins without getting hit, you can do 6 rooms of moblins without getting hit. This is not a dungeon that's supposed to kill you, it's more so a dungeon where you're supposed to get lost or have trouble finding your way, because, again, it's large and really zigzaggy. Not to mention you need a lot of bombs to get through here, and speaking of which, we get our second and last bomb expansion, bringing our bombs from 12 to 16 total. It's expensive, you don't really need all those bombs, a lot of people skip it, it's not a requirement to finish the game, but I have the rupees, so why not? It's not like I spend them on anything else. By the way, for something completely different, there's something that I actually should have mentioned way early in the playthrough, but I didn't. It's that, I mentioned earlier that this game is one of the first games to actually have a save feature, but I didn't mention how exactly you save. The main way of saving the game is by dying. Only when you die can you get the save screen, or at least that's what most people think, but there's also a really weird and obscure way to save the game. If you want to save the game but don't want to die, you have to pause the game, then take a second controller and then press A and any direction on the D-pad, and then it will bring up the save screen, which is weird. Like, it's one thing to require a button combination just to save, it's another thing to put that button combination on the second controller, like this game was programmed by Aquamentus or something. You know, I never thought I'd say this. I kinda miss the dark nuts. Right now I'm just shooting things. At least with the dark nuts you need to think before you fight, I guess. I don't care for the Wizros or likes right now, but the dark nuts, I think, add a nice little bit of combat variety. Then again, I don't really play a Zelda game for combat. That's one thing that's nice about the Zelda series, is that in terms of what you're doing, it's very broad, but it all fits in with each other very nicely. For example, Zelda games always have combat, but you're not doing nothing but fighting, unless you're playing Hyrule Warriors. You're also constantly solving puzzles whenever you're in the dungeons, or outside of the dungeons you're exploring or doing side missions. So those are all different draws to the Zelda series without being jarring, without feeling like you're playing 2 completely different games. Which is why personally I don't feel like every single one of those aspects need to be perfect. In my case, Zelda games are mostly about exploring for me. I like having a big world where I can look around and find stuff, and also have a reason to look around and find stuff, and actually have it be worth it. That's the thing I want most from a Zelda game. I don't need the combat to be very complex, I just need it to work and have just enough variety. I don't need the puzzles to be very difficult, I just don't want to be bored while doing them. But you know, other people might mostly play Zelda games for the puzzles, others might mostly play it for the combat. There's actually a pretty neat graph you can find online about the 4 different gamer types, being the socializer, the killer, the explorer, and the achiever. And you know what, since I have time to fill in this long dungeon, I'm gonna explain every single one of them. I think they mostly speak for themselves, but the socializer is the one who likes to have other people involved, who likes to play multiplayer or just do things with other people, who likes to share their games. The killer can be 2 things. It can be catharsis, getting satisfaction out of, you know, beating enemies in video games, but can also refer to the competitive player, the one who takes pride in being, well, better. Or like speedrunners, which is also part of like the social branch, but it's not necessarily with others, it's against others, but others are still involved, so again, social. Then there's the achiever, which does share a lot with the killer, mostly being about satisfaction, but not necessarily involving others, more so about completion, about getting rewards, about finishing a game or a part of a game. And then finally there's the explorer, which is what I'm the most, which is about, you know, finding things, though at the same time you want to get a reward for finding that thing, so that's related to the achiever. And if we ignore the existence of the internet for a second, it can also be social, you know, sharing your secrets with others. My point is that with all of them, 3 out of 4 have something in common with each other. Like I said, personally I'm an explorer, but I want to achieve something with that exploring. I'm not necessarily social because, again, I can look things up on the internet. But hey, what kind of gamer are you? Tell me in the comments, or don't. I just want to be done with this part. Oh, by the way, Dig Dogger now comes with an upgrade after you use the recorder. Instead of just becoming that one tiny eyeball, he splits into 3, and when you defeat one of them, the other ones become faster. So at least he becomes more difficult, which is more than I can say about the boss at the end of the dungeon, which is the exact same boss from the first dungeon. No upgrades, no anything. Oh look, it's Moldorm, who you'll probably recognize better as that one dick from A Link to the Past. Moldorm returns in A Link to the Past, where he just crawls around a whole lot, then kicks you off the stage, then you fall to the next floor, and then his health resets, and that's why he's an asshole. And then there's also a fight in Wind Waker, which is pretty much wannabe Moldorm. Also, there's something I ignored earlier because I was going on about my 4 types of gamer rants, is that we ran into another hint room, quotation marks. And our useless hint of today is, there's a secret in the tip of the nose, which sounds easy enough, but I'm not sure what nose exactly, because it might refer to this dungeon, except I don't know where exactly the nose of this dungeon is. And I tried to look it up and the wiki didn't know either. Perhaps there's a formation in the overworld that looks like a nose, I have no idea. And speaking of characters that say weird things, this is Grumble Guy. At least this one is easier to decipher. Grumble means his stomach is grumbling, so he's hungry, so we should give him food. Luckily we have the meat with us, so we give him the meat, he opens the door and we can continue with the dungeon. But now imagine, you get to this point of the dungeon, which is about halfway, and you get to this guy, and you don't have the meat. It's not like there's anything stopping you from entering the dungeon without the meat, so that means you have to leave and get the meat and then do this part of the dungeon all over again. And that's if you have the rupees to get the meat, and that's if you know where to buy the meat, and that's if you know you even should buy the meat, because Grumble is less clear than I am hungry or give me food. The point is that some people like to think that when you use a guide you are less of a man, when in reality, when you use a guide it's probably because sometimes a game can be stupid. Or maybe you can find the answer without using a guide after spending enough time exploring. Time I don't want to spend, because I have other games I maybe want to play, or maybe different responsibilities. Point is, maybe a guide can also just be used as a time saver, and maybe people who say you should never use a guide can stick it up their ass because they're a bunch of whiny little bitches. I really hate purists. I mean, why, if I can make something better, why wouldn't I? If I were to buy a house, I'm not gonna leave it as it is. I'm gonna put furniture in it, make it overall better. I'm not gonna keep it the same because, no, that's how I bought it. That's how it was. No, that's not how it works. Things have flaws. If you have to deal with it, you have to deal with it. But if you don't, why would you? Why would you actively waste your time and or enjoyment? Rant over. On to the next one. Do I have something to rant about? I mean, I always have something to rant about, but like, something relevant. This dungeon hurts my eyes. Well, so did Dungeon 5. In fact, I think this dungeon and Dungeon 5 are the exact same color. The Dungeon 3, there was a slightly different shade of green. I think Dungeon 4 had the same color as 6. And this is not a rant, by the way. I know the NES has a limited color palette. Of course, they had to reuse some of the colors, but where's my purple dungeon, damn it? An orange dungeon? A hot pink dungeon? I'm not saying it would have looked very good, but I don't think this green looks all that good either, so I did really like the colors of the first 2 dungeons. Yes, I'm still talking about color. I have nothing else to talk about. I promise the next 2 parts will be better, but this one is just a lot of fighting enemies and not a lot going on. It's like the elevator section in a beat 'em up. You fight a bunch of enemies, you go to the next part, you fight more enemies. I mean, granted, we're still exploring this dungeon, and the other dungeons in the game also have a lot of combat, but I'm not sure what it is about this one, other than it's very large and there's little enemy variety. Might be the layout, I'm not sure, I'm not really sure how to judge that sort of thing, but oh, I think it's time we get the dungeon item, and it's kind of unimpressive. Or at least when I actually go into the staircase in the middle. I know, of course, I gotta kill the enemies. Why did I do this? I waste time. This dungeon is bad because of me. Now let's go get the dungeon item, and it's another candle. I already have a candle. In fact, I have a better candle, because blue flames are hotter than red flames. Well, in real life at least. Not here. In this game the red candle is an upgrade to our blue candle. Now we can use the candle multiple times per screen as opposed to just once. Honestly, I always thought it was kinda odd that the blue candle could only be used once per screen, but now it's slightly useful as a weapon. Except I have the rod, which is even better as a weapon, so fuck it. But hey, now the candle is slightly more useful until we get to the next dungeon where it becomes entirely useless. Honestly, I feel like it would have been better if we always were able to use the candle multiple times per screen, or just got the red candle a lot earlier. But getting the red candle at this point is just sort of unimpressive. And again, you really don't have to do the dungeons in this order. The only thing you really need is the recorder, though then again that one is in a slightly harder dungeon. Though to admit, I've never really done the dungeons in this game out of order. I do want to try though, just because I can, and I don't play by your rules or numbers. Then again, before that I probably need to try the Master Quest first, and I will. I'm not necessarily looking forward to it, but I don't know, I do like planning out a route and making a map, and I just like planning things. Look at that, I'm actually using the red candle, and again, it's not bad as a weapon, it's just you get it so late, and in most occasions I prefer using the rod. Though it is stronger than the rod, considering it hits multiple times. But the rod is just faster, longer range, and the thing about the candle is that you can actually get hurt by your own fire, which is pretty funny, but not convenient. But hey, it was useful for that fight, so thanks Red Candle, I will never acknowledge your existence ever again. Oh, look, more mini-bosses. Remember when there was only one of these at the end of the second dungeon, and he was sort of a threat because I couldn't just ignore him? I still find it odd that the boss of this dungeon is the dragon boss from the first dungeon, even though the room we just passed would have been harder than that, if we couldn't just ignore it. And then there's this room, which is sort of a dick move, because it's at the end of the dungeon, and these guys can send you back to the first dungeon. And they also put bubbles here, making it so that you can defend yourself against the wall masters. What also sucks is that I just picked up the stopwatch. I mean, usually I love picking up the stopwatch, but in this case I sorta needed to push a block, but the stopwatch also froze the block, and I don't think the stopwatch ever wears off on its own, so I sorta had to leave the room and come back. On the other hand, maybe the stopwatch didn't freeze the block, maybe I just sorta wasn't in the right place to push the block. Maybe. I say that because I'm pretty sure the stopwatch is supposed to only affect the enemies and not the environment. Maybe I just felt like wasting more time, who knows. With that said, we only have a minute left, and we're not even at the boss yet. It's almost like you can beat this boss within 12 seconds. Maybe it's supposed to be that this dungeon is very long, so maybe you'll get to this boss with very little health, but that's not exactly the case, and I'm pretty sure I didn't use my potion either. But again, there's no way to really ensure if a player is gonna have a lot of hearts at this point, if a player's gonna have a potion at this point. I can forgive a game where you can do optional stuff at pretty much any point for having a little odd difficulty. And it's boss time. You know what, I'm just gonna count how long this will take me. 1, 2, 3, 4... Okay. With that said, let's get Triforce piece number 7, and then we just have one more to go. So I will see you next time in part 8 of Let's Play The Legend of Zelda. See you then.